Hey guys, this will be just a quick intro. This will be a new series that for this channel called Let's Talk, where it'll just be like a 10 to 15 minute video where I just talk about something related, just to give my 2 cents on whatever that's happening. Doesn't have to be gaming, doesn't have to be anything, but yeah. Okay, anyways, onto this video. So before we get into the video, I'll just like to put down two disclaimers. First of all, this is by no means just any sort of attack towards whatever miHoYo does with the way they do things and or people's opinion or whatever. So it's just my 2 cents on different topic, as I've mentioned before. And the second disclaimer is that all the things that I will be saying in this video is all in respect to the endgame content currently in Genshin, which is the Spiral Abyss. So if you're a casual player or you've only ever went against these kind of enemies in the overworld, then feel free to skip the video or just stick around to just hear me talk for like 15 minutes. Okay, Riff Hounds. Now, Riff Hounds are an enemy that's been around ever since the introduction of the Surumi Island, also known as the 6th Island of Inazuma, which was introduced I believe last patch in patch 2.2. And okay, so what are Riff Hounds? Let's just give like a quick like backstory to it. So according to the handbook said something along the lines of like ominous aliens that seemed like they came from outer space. But then if you look up in the Genshin wiki or you read up the lore, an alchemist named Gold, also happens to be Albedo's master, created these Riff Hounds. And the Riff Hounds are one of the 3 things that Gold created. The other 2 being Albedo, also known as Cretaceous, and Durin, the dragon that died on Dragonspine and gave us the 4-star weapon, Festering Desire. So, now that we know that these things are not actual aliens that came out of nowhere, so why do I want to make this video in the first place? Okay, so this is in respect to Abyss, right? So Abyss, everything is like a huge DPS check, and Riff Hounds currently only appear in the floor 12 of the Abyss. So everything is just a huge DPS check. So I'll be going over why Riff Hounds, in my opinion, that Riff Hounds in the Abyss should be toned down, or Riff Hounds should be toned down in general. Okay, so I looked up a little bit of information over on the Genshin Wikipedia, and energy generation or particle drops by enemies applies to this rule, right? Where there is this unique rule where upon damaging enemies, if you're able to bring their HP threshold to a certain amount, the enemies will drop a certain amount of energy particles, and to some enemies, whenever they die, they will leave behind different kinds of energy for your characters to use. Of course, energy can be obtained in different ways aside from that, and one of the few examples is picking up crates or different things around the overworld, or of course using your character elemental skills. So upon doing some experimentation as the gameplay happens in the background, one of the few things that I found is that the very basics of this rule, I'll just show it in the screen, post it, we'll put it on. Enemies generally drop energy at the 75%, 50%, 25%, and the 0% HP mark. Of course, this applies to most enemies, but what they drop depends on what type of enemies they are. So upon doing some experimentation, it was found that humanoid enemies and automatons, such as the Ruin Gods, drop non-elemental energy. And what's the difference between elemental energy and non-elemental is that elemental energy, like let's say electro energy, will give more energy to electro characters but less to non-electro characters, while non-elemental energy will give the same amount of energy regardless of what your elements are. And another thing that I found is that elemental enemies drop elemental energy that is corresponding to their element type. So for example, if you were to go against like a Cryo Abyss Mage, right, or a Hydro Slime, the Cryo Abyss Mage would only drop Cryo Particles and Cryo Orbs, while Hydro Slimes will only drop Hydro Particles. Of course, this exception does apply to a few things. Oh well, that's the wrong part of the script. Okay, and another thing is that normally when enemies die, they drop energy orbs, right? And for example, this applies to this happens for Hilichurls whenever they die, or Warper Flowers. They will drop orb and energy. Elemental orbs, that is. Now, what is a particle and what is an orb? So let me quickly explain to you what the difference is. TLDR, particles are just those tiny dots that give you, I believe, about 3 to 4 energy or some sort. Post edit, maybe we'll just look it up and put it in the edit. And orbs are basically, literal energy orbs that flow to you, and they usually orbs give you your characters more energy. But of course, not every enemy drops elemental energy orbs on death, and some exception applies to assassins and snipes. And that's where we get to the star of the topic. Now, Riff Hounds. So we know the backstory and all that explanations out of the way. Now let me explain the mechanic towards Riff Hounds, right? So we currently have the Geo Riff Hounds and the Electro Riff Hounds. So we have 2 different elements, and there are 2 types of Riff Hounds. We have the Riff Hound whelps, which are the puppies, and then we have the large Riff Hounds, or what we like to call them as doggos. So let's go over their stats. Riff Hounds, the big boys, have 25% resistance to everything, but they have less resistance once they enter the Devour phase. So to quickly explain what the Devour phase is, let's say you go against an Electro Riff Hound, right? If you were to damage them and build up this Rage meter using Electro, it has to be their corresponding element, they will enter their Devour phase, and what it does is simple. They will gain decreased resistance towards their own element, but they will be more aggressive. And so the stats for this is, let's go over the numbers, I'll put it on screen. So the large Riff Hounds will have 25% resistance to all, while the puppies will have 20%. And of course, once they enter the Devour phase, the Riff Hounds will have minus 20% resistance to their corresponding element in the Rage phase, while the puppies will have negative 5%. And so, if you think about it, right, you get into the head of miHoYo and why they made this mechanic for these kind of enemies, right? So the idea would be is that, let's say you go against an Electro Riff Hound, right? So they want you to use electro characters or electro kinds of damage to build up the Devour phase, and hopefully their negative resistance will buff your electro damage so that you can kill them faster. But the downside of this is that the idea of the Riff Hounds is that as long as they don't enter their Devour phase, they do not attack as often as you think it is. Because once they enter that phase, the movesets don't change, it's just that they do those movesets more often. So basically they attack more and they do things more. And of course, there's the counter argument to this, is that if you don't use their corresponding element, it'll take a bit longer to kill them, but they don't move as much and they don't attack that much. So I think I can praise miHoYo for this case, in which that, they try to think of this fancy new mechanic, and so that people can try to strategize and just get rid of the enemies, blah blah blah. But the downside is that the current meta that we know of is mostly just a vaporized melt thing, even though melt is still inferior to vaporize due to how easy it is to do vaporize and how we don't have a pyro Xingqiu. So at least you can see there's gonna be maybe you can see the gameplay of my current Abyss, the Hu Tao team can deal with these Riff Hounds just fine by using the regular Hu Tao Xingqiu vaporize kind of strat. So if you think about it, right, sure, you can use their corresponding element to try to kill them as fast, but the downside is that their movesets are so annoying, especially in the context of the Abyss, that it kind of goes against your, the idea of trying to kill them as fast as possible, because they move so much that it's hard for you to hit them. And so thus, I'm just reading off a script while putting my thoughts of this. So why should you need to use their corresponding elements when you can just use the meta, which is vaporize, right? Or of course, the good old 4-piece Viridescent to shred their resistance. So you don't really have to care about their 25% resistance, because as long as you have Zhongli Shield or you have Viriset, then their resistance or the mechanics don't really matter that much. And all these complaints, right, it's not really about how the mechanic is bad or anything. All of this is still in context of the Abyss. The problem is the Riff Hounds, especially the adults one, the big doggos, the puppies don't really matter that much because they don't move as often. Their hitbox is super small and they don't have any problems with them, so that's fine. We'll put it out of the way. We're talking about the big, giant, floating doggos. So, if you guys remember when Nobushis and Kairagis were introduced in Inazuma, and then I believe they got added to the Spiral Abyss in 2.1, when I did it during the time where I was using the Permafreeze team, it was hard to deal with them because they move too much, and you can't use characters like Venti, Sucrose to crowd control them or to CC them simply because their weight value is too high, and what that means is basically they can't be CC TLDR. And I believe after one rotation of Abyss, I believe in the next patch around, is it 2.1 or 2.2? I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to remember based on memory. They nerf these two enemies. They nerf it so that I believe mostly it's the Nobushis, the Kairagis, not that much. But the Nobushis, right, they remove their abilities to dash back very often. So they reduce the frequency of their ability to dodge all these moves and thus making them less annoying to deal with. Because the problem is like the Nobushis have the abilities where they can, do a quick sword dash forward to just completely dodge all your bursts and all your abilities, even if you're mid casting your burst, and thus you're literally just wasted whatever the hell you were trying to use. And the fact that they can't be stunned so easily just means that it's going to be hard to get them to group together, simply because they just won't stand still. And of course, after the nerf, you can use Venti and Sucrose and you can actually CC them reliably. And of course, we have Kazuha. Good old Kazuha can just kill everything, as always. And that's where it comes back to the Riff Hounds, right? The Riff Hounds, the adult ones, they move way too much. Because there is this one move where they dash backwards and then they charge like in a straight line 3 times in a row before it stops. In the Abyss, right? If you can't stop them or stagger them as they do that charge, you're basically forced to just run around, or the only other like alternative strategy is to bring a character like Yoimiya or bow user that can like auto lock on or something. But otherwise, it's just a huge time waster, and that's why Riff Hounds their movesets are just annoying. And the most important one, if anyone has done Abyss or has went against Riff Hounds, the big doggos, they have a moveset where they back up to a certain range, and then they prepare like a long bite charge, whatever you want to call it. So here's the problem: the move itself, you see the fact that the whole idea of how it goes back and charges up, that's fine, and how it attacks forward, that's easy to dodge. But the problem is that there is an issue where every time they retreat backwards, where they try to charge up the moveset still maintains collision even though the Riff Hound's hitbox is no longer there. I'm pretty sure anyone who's done Abyss would know this. If you use Bennett's skill or Xingqiu's skill, where you would swap to your character and use your skill, and then they do that move at the right time. And the thing is, right, these two characters, their skill auto locks on enemies. Like, it brings the character forward just to ensure that your skill will hit. But because there's an old collision there, right, it's like there's an invisible wall that you can't really get past. So you imagine using Xingqiu especially, you use your E to gain your energy back and you have sacrificial, but simply because of this ridiculous broken hitbox or ridiculous broken collision, your skill is just going to be on cooldown for the next 20 seconds and your Abyss run is ruined. Like I said, everything's all in terms of Abyss, so overall no issues. So that's why we look into the enemy design for miHoYo's enemies, right? I feel like too much movement on enemies, especially in the Abyss, is the bad design, simply because, okay, so we have both. You can say, just use Yoimiya or just use a character, or just use Kazuha or something, right? But a majority of the weapon types in the game is melee, or melee weapons, or melee characters. And trying to say that you have to use a bow DPS or range character like bows or catalysts, you can do that, but how valuable would it be to eventually that would release more enemies that moves a lot and there's no way to completely stun them or stop them from moving. And the Abyss, having 3 billion HP doesn't matter because floor 12 is a big DPS check. But having a lot of movement is a pure time waster for people like us who want to get 36 stars, or maybe just in general, like maybe you just want to clear Abyss and you don't want to build this kind of annoying stuff, So here's a few examples as I read my freaking text. Enemies like the Electro Assassin Mage or the Cryo Assassin Mage, I'm pretty sure we've all known that, the Mirror Maiden once she gains a polarization state, and of course the pre-nerf Nobushis, and the two robots. You know who I'm talking about. The Ruin Cruiser, aka the Triangle Doritos guy, who has this move when you get close to them. They'll fire up this ball and just retreat like 5 meters backwards, thus invalidating all your damage and all your bursts, and waste your time even more. And the Ruin Destroyers, aka those snake looking robot creatures, they just dig on the ground and have like 4 seconds of iframe. Like, funny enough, right, if I look back on my Abyss experience, and this is backed up with one of my friend with Remorin's experience for these kind of things, we had Ruin Graders. Okay, let's just go through, like, in context of 12-3, level 100 enemies in the Spiral Abyss. Enemies in the Abyss have 2.5 times more health in the floor 12. Okay, let's compare. So a regular Ruin Guard has about 643,000 HP. Ruin Hunter is the weakest with 551,000, at least one of the few original. Ruin Grader the highest with 827. And then you can see the four new robots, right? The Defender, everyone knows who this is, and the Scout, which is the jellyfish guy, both have 582,000. While the weaker half would be the Ruin Cruiser and Destroyer, 415,000. And funny enough, if you look back at the previous Abyss, or if you've done the previous Abyss, the ones that are the hardest to kill are the weakest ones, aka the Dorito Ruin Cruiser and the Snake Boy Ruin Destroyer, because they have iframes and they have moves that just keep them away. And you can see that the design of the Abyss, if they were to spawn every single enemy all at once and give you a timer, and they put them, they group them all close together, it's easy for you to do enough damage because they're all close to each other, and all your damage, you'll be hitting multiple of them at once. But instead they do this design where they just do like multiple waves, like 1-2 waves every chamber, and the enemies have like such an annoying moveset that if you want to target one, the other two will just be staring at like 3 miles away and they'll be wasting your time, right? And the same applies to Riff Hounds. So apparently the current Electro Riff Hounds in 12.3, level in Spiral Abyss, a single one of them has 970,000 HP. And so that means if you go against the Electro Riff Hounds in the first half of 12.3, both of those Riff Hounds have as much HP as the old Perpetual Mechanical Array in 12.2. Or maybe like this is even comparable to the triple Magu Kenki, because if I recall correctly, the triple Magu Kenki, each of them has about 500,000 to 600,000 health. So can you imagine, these dogs are so tanky and they have movesets that are so annoying that, honestly, even from my take on this is that if you can't get 36 stars in the Abyss, it's perfectly fine. You can settle with 30 stars and you can settle with 33 stars, or heck, you can just do Abyss all the way to floor 11 and you don't even have to touch floor 12. Because anyone who does floor 12 are most likely like endgame veterans. So if you're fine with that, that's perfectly fine. And so, what are my 2 cents on this entire thing? So how I see it is that miHoYo's enemy design, at least in this case in terms of Riff Hounds, right? Ever since Inazuma came out, every enemy has been tankier, which is, I guess, what they're trying to do is that they want to introduce more cities and they want their cities to slowly get harder and harder, which is fine. Enemy design's the enemy's appearance pretty cool, but in terms of enemy design, I would say making an enemy super tanky and also have a movesets that allows them to constantly get iframes and dodge all your moves is annoying, because it punishes you for not running some sort of composition like perma-freeze them, or overloaded, or using a character like that does heavy attacks such as Ito. So if you don't have any of these, you kind of get punished by not, stunning them. That's why I feel like my whole take on miHoYo's enemy design is that enemies that are pre-Inazuma are easy as heck, but I find it to be perfectly balanced. Because you think about it, Ruin Guards in 12.3 in Abyss has like 643,000 HP, and yet why are they easier to kill than some freaking Dorito machine made out of iron that only has like 2/3 of that health? Simply because the Ruin Guards don't move that much. They don't attack that often, and they have a lot of resistance to physical and certain other elements, but they don't attack that much and they don't move as much. So I feel like for Genshin's enemy design, there should be some sort of balance for the entire thing. at least this is in context of Abyss. I don't know how you casuals would any casual players or any non-end game non-veteran players would think about this. So if you have any opinions on this, let me know down below, or maybe you can just like, I don't know, record yourself a video on YouTube and just let me know. Maybe I'll react to it, or you can just hop over on my Discord server. So yeah, so what's the overall take on this? Riff Hounds are annoying because, okay, the Riff Hounds mechanics is fine. That's pretty intuitive, even though based on the current meta, the mechanic doesn't matter too much. The only thing that matters is that the large Riff Hounds move too much. So this is just my experience based on the Nobushis, but I really think that miHoYo will be nerfing Riff Hounds, especially their ability to just dash around a lot, probably by 2.4. But this is just a pure speculation, and at worst they may never nerf it at all. If that's the case, then we just have to hope that it just doesn't come back in the future, Abyss. Yeah. Yeah, this is a freaking 21-minute talk. I'll be editing the video, I'll be providing all the numbers and post edit. So what do you guys think about this, especially, you know, the casuals and stuff, and maybe other fellow veterans? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. So yeah, I guess that's the first episode of Let's Talk. I'll probably make more of these videos in future, just to talk about any controversial thing on anything, basically. And yeah, that's my 2 cents for Let's Talk. This is Ethereal. Socials in the description. I'll be signing off. See you guys next time.